And I now recognize my colleague, the gentle lady from Puerto Rico, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Vice Chairman, and I really appreciate this hearing taking place. I want to thank all for being here today to discuss one of the most important and critical issues currently affecting all the U.S. territories, the impending expiration of the additional Medicaid funds granted by the Affordable Care Act and the accompanying instability of our healthcare infrastructure. In 2017, 1.6 million Americans living in the territories were enrolled in Medicaid. That breaks down to 79% of the population of American Samoa, 21% of the population of Guam, 33% of the population of Northern Mariana Islands, and 47% of the population of Puerto Rico, and 16% of the population of the U.S. Virgin Islands. The national average enrollment for the states and the District of Columbia was 21%. During the same year, the Medicaid program spent an average of about $1,800 a year per territory enrollee, in contrast to the national average, excluding the territories, that was more than $7,000 per enrollee. Medicaid in the territories is subject to statutory federal matching percentage, what we call FMAP, and the FMAP for the states varies annually relative to each state's per capita income. The FMAP for the territories, however, is completely different. We are permanently capped by law to 55%. If the formula used to determine the FMAP for the states were applied to Puerto Rico, the federal funding match share will be increasing up to 83% program maximum. For the 50 states and the District of Columbia, Medicaid provides a guarantee of federal matching payments with no preset limit. And this is the main difference between the treatment to the territories and the rest of the states. However, annual federal funding for Medicaid in the territories is subject to this statutory cap. Once a territory exhausts its capped federal funds, it will no longer receive federal financial support for its Medicaid program during that fiscal year. In 2011, the Affordable Care Act granted the territories an additional $8.25 billion in federal funds for their Medicaid programs in lieu of establishing a healthcare insurance marketplace. The additional funding for each territory ranged from $109.2 million for the Northern Marianas, $6.3 billion for Puerto Rico, and was available to be drawn down between July 2011 and September 2019. Since 2011, federal Medicaid spending in Puerto Rico has exceeded the statutory cap by using the funds available under the Affordable Care Act. These funds were depleted in February of last year. During the last Congress, 115th Congress, the President and Trump acted to avert this crisis in Puerto Rico Medicaid's program with a temporary increase of the federal cap to $296 million for the fiscal year 18-19 in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2017. Moreover, as a result of the state of emergency caused by the Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017, we again increased the federal cap to $4.8 billion for the first time, 100% federal cost share to the fiscal year 19 to keep Puerto Rico Medicaid program operational. All these additional sources of federal funding for Puerto Rico in Medicaid program will expire in September of this year. For my island, Medicaid cap set by statute in the fiscal year 2020 will be approximately $375 million, with no additional source of federal funding available. This means that Puerto Rico will exhaust its federal Medicaid allotment in the first 3 months of fiscal year 2020 and will bear the expense in excess of 85% of the federal program, placing additional pressure on sparse territory resources. And I know this is going to be happening in all territories as well. Each territory is affected by this inequitable treatment in healthcare funding in their own way. However, all of our Medicaid programs, as currently conceived, are unsustainable. This underfunding contributes to larger systemic problems, including lower provider reimbursement rates and provider shortages. To correct this challenge, I have introduced H.R. 2306, the Puerto Rico Medicaid Act, which seeks to strengthen the Medicaid program on the island by increasing the cap and removing the statutory FMAP limitation. I'm also an original co-sponsor of H.R. 1354, the Territories Health Equity Act, legislation introduced by Congresswoman Plaskett of the Virgin Islands that addressed to face this problem for all 5 territories. Both bills are currently under the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I will continue to work with my fellow delegates and the members of that committee to advocate for the advancement of those bills. I trust that today's testimony will help my colleagues understand the urgent need of action. If we fail to act with the expediency that the situations require, the provision of health care in all territories will be severely affected by far-reaching repercussions for the rest of our nation. Although I recognize that this is not the committee with jurisdiction, I would like to thank Vice Chairman Sablan and members of this committee for this important hearing, having the witnesses to testify and to be on the record on the impacts of the Medicaid cliff that will undoubtedly help us as we continue working for a long-term solution of this issue. Thank you, Chairman.